So the between subjects research design is a type of a research design in which different participants are allocated or recruited across the different experimental conditions and groups in a study. Let's understand this better with an example. Imagine you're trying to discern the number of items recalled and the recall accuracy of those items based on the type of training your participants receive. You could subject the participants to a memory-specific training or a non-memory specific training, such as a spatial skills training. For this study, you will recruit a sample of population and then you could subject them to a specific learning task. For example, you could ask your participants to learn two different lists. In list 1, you could ask the participants to learn about the associations between names and faces of people. In list 2, you could ask the participants to learn about the names of famous cities and cuisines found in those cities. Following this, you could randomly allocate a subset of your participants to condition A of the study, which in this example could be a memory training condition, and you subject the other part of your sample to condition B, which would be the non-memory training or the spatial skills training in this particular condition. Following this, the participants would then participate in a recall test in which we would assess the performance of recall accuracy and the number of items recalled. But that's not the interest of this particular video. The key takeaway here is that in this current study, there are two different conditions, A and B, and different participants have been recruited in each of these conditions. This is the between subjects research design. So now that we understand what the between subjects design is, let's look at the advantages of using the between subjects design. The first advantage of using the between subjects design is that it prevents the effects of learning or crossover effects as well as practice effects. Let's understand this with an example. For example, we want to study if the differences in the type of stimulus presented in a cognitive paradigm called the flanker task impacts one's cognitive control performance in this particular task. Imagine in condition A, you present the participants with a arrow stimuli, and in condition B of this study, you present the participants with a shape stimuli, such as triangles. You do this across both congruent and incongruent trials in both condition A and condition B. Now, imagine a situation wherein, unlike the between subjects design, the participant is recruited to perform in both conditions A and B of the study. In such a situation, there is a high possibility that they would display learning, crossover, or practice effects. But how does this happen? Let's understand. So imagine that this specific participant, let's assume she's called Ella, is performing in condition A for say about 100 trials across both the congruent and the incongruent trials. It is very likely that she will develop the skills to perform in the flanker task more generally. When she is then subjected to condition B, she might just use her past experience of the learning that she has attained in condition A, which could enhance her performance, giving us an erroneous estimate of her cognitive control abilities across the different experimental conditions. In such a situation, we might conclude, however erroneously, that Ella has better cognitive control for shape stimuli as opposed to the arrow stimuli. This is the issue of practice, crossover, or learning effect, which is not faced in a between subjects design since we recruit different participants across the different conditions. The next advantage of using the between subjects design is that this research design prevents participant fatigue. Because each participant in this research design participates only in one condition, they don't have to repeatedly participate across different conditions or groups. This allows them to not experience any effects of fatigue. This is very important as getting fatigued can impact participant performance in the cognitive tasks negatively, in turn impairing our conclusions of the research question and research studies. However, this design helps us to avoid any such situation, and therefore this is one of the main advantages also of using the between subjects design. Finally, the other key advantage of using the between subjects design is that this design allows us to collect a large amount of data within a short period of time by allowing us to simultaneously test multiple variables and conditions or experimental groups. So in the flanker task example that we saw before, with the between subjects design, we could collect the data of all participants simultaneously across the various conditions and the various trial types. Let's now look at the key disadvantages of using the between subjects design. The first key disadvantage of this particular type of design is that a large participant pool has to be recruited in studies that use the between subjects design. This can be a challenge as it can be difficult to find participants to take part in a study. If we don't have many participants, it might be difficult, therefore, to use this particular design. So this is the first disadvantage. Moving on, the other disadvantage of using the between subjects design is that it can decrease our control over the confounding variables. To understand what confounding variables are, you can check out our video on confounding variables by clicking the I button on the top right corner of the screen or finding the link in the description below. Moving on, now there are two specific types of issues that can be difficult to control in this design, which can in turn lead to the introduction of confounds. The first type is called the assignment bias, and the second type is referred to as the individual variability. Let's look at each of these aspects a little more in detail. The issue of assignment bias arises when participant allocation across the different experimental groups and conditions is not undertaken randomly. Let's understand this with an example. Imagine you're trying to study if there is a difference in the working memory abilities of women versus men. Imagine while recruiting the participants and allocating the participants, the researchers did not match the educational background of the participants such that they ended up recruiting men who had higher educational background than women. Now, this situation is likely to introduce the assignment bias issue. After the study is conducted, it's possible that you find that women have lower working memory abilities than men. While it is possible that this is correct, it is well possible that this conclusion could be erroneous and affected by assignment bias. As we saw, the experimenter initially, while allocating and recruiting the participants, did not control for the educational background of the participants, such that the men recruited were higher in their educational abilities than women. And this could have in turn affected the conclusions that we discerned about their working memory abilities, all of which got affected due to the assignment bias issue. The other aspect that can introduce confounds pertains to individual variability. Now, recall that the participants across the different conditions of a study are different in the between subjects design. This is very likely to introduce inter-individual differences, such as personality trait differences. Although there are ways to address this, if remained unchecked, then individual variability could negatively impact the conclusions we make about the research questions of interest by skewing the data.